Welcome back to Metropole Debrief. When we sit down, it's time for that conversation. Joining me today, former Deputy Prime Minister, former Finance Minister, and the Mani National Congress Party leader, Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, to put the budget into context. This is more of a critique of the national budget, and we'll equally get to touch on some of the issues that are affecting this nation. Thank you very much, Honorable Musalia, for making time. We are glad that you could honor our invitation.
Thank you, Andiro.
Today is a budget day.
Yes.
A lot has been said, and we've seen the budget is estimated to be around 3.2 trillion Kenya shillings. But the question is, one, do we need such a huge budget?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I think it's 3.02 trillion. Let me just say that even the minister himself did not seem convinced with what he was presenting. Because frankly speaking, the targets around the revenue collection, which should form the core of financing this budget, he set at about 2.2 trillion. And we have seen KRA constantly setting targets that it has failed to meet. Therefore, we don't know what has happened at KRA that can convince the Kenyans that this time they shall meet their targets. The second thing is that the deficit is very huge, almost 610 billion Kenya shillings. And looking at his proposed tax measures, I was hard pressed to try and figure out which of his tax measures would yield the deficit requirement. So in fact, what that means is that his deficit is going to be primarily based on domestic, the financing of the deficit is going to be primarily pegged on domestic borrowing and external borrowing. But in terms of what you call additional tax measures, no, that will not happen. And that is why I looked at his demeanor as he read. I don't think he was convinced that what he was reading is realistic. Yeah.
And speaking of the deficit, 600 and almost 10 billion Kenya shillings, 607 if I'm not wrong. And the tax policies, domestic market, external borrowing. But can the Kenyan economy really afford this kind of budget?
No, we have been living beyond our means. That's the reality. We have been trying to do too much too fast. This is the dilemma with this government. They've been trying to achieve too many things within a very short time frame. And this is clearly not realistic. For instance, when they say that they're going to curtail expenditure and so forth, and then on the other side he says, now they're going to rein in on ministries or departments that have been undertaking programs without feasibility studies and without knowing whether there is value for money. Here is a minister now admitting that they have been actually funding programs and projects without feasibility studies, so that even the procurement has been skewed. So he says they want to rein in on rogue procurement by ministries and departments, and at the same time rein in on programs or projects that are not well thought out. Now you can understand where the dams came from. Because part of the allegations, and it is true, is that the 165 billion Kenya shillings this government has spent on the proposed dams, there were no feasibility studies done for some of those dams. This is a serious confession. It's a very serious confession from the Treasury that this government has been funding projects where due diligence has not been done. Now you're telling us you want to rein in when the horse has actually left the stable.
So from where you sit, the government is responsible for the financial woes that is facing.
Oh yes, right now the government's appetite and the desire to try and do so many things, it's of ambition. They're not being realistic. And this is where we're going to have a lot of difficulty going into the future. Because the debt burden, which he has been denying, he ended up saying, fine, we have not defaulted on any of our debt repayments. But then he goes further to say, however, we want to work on reducing the deficit from about 5.6% of GDP, bring it down to below 3% of GDP in the short to medium term. So that we can have, because the debt situation is not sustainable. So he's now admitting they may not have defaulted, but he's realizing we are now in a rut, and going forward, the situation is no longer sustainable.
But where is the discord? Because when a colleague of ours in the media industry asked the president last year in Mombasa about debt, he was very categorical and he quoted Japan. And if you look at an economy like Japan, its debt ratio versus GDP is high, but the economy is doing really well. It's not on the red. How comes Kenya is borrowing, but now we are on the red? Where's the discord?
You see what Kenya has done in the last few years is that Kenya's prudent borrowing policies were generally very good. Kenya always went for what was concessional borrowing. This is, and I'm talking about external borrowing, okay? And there are nations like Japan which provided us with concessional borrowing. What do I mean? I mean loans that you can pay 2%. The rate of interest is about 2%, and you can have a repayment period of about 30 years. What has happened in the last few years is that this government has migrated from what you call concessionary borrowing, especially even say from the World Bank. They've gone for commercial borrowing, where interest rates are at about 7% and repayment period of about 8 years. Another, like the last Eurobond, one tranche, which is 900 billion Kenya shillings, is at 7% interest rate, repayable in about 8 years. The second one is at 8% interest rate, repayable in 12 years. That means in the middle of the next government in 2022, the tranche that these guys have taken must be repaid. So basically, what has happened is that they have gone for commercial borrowing, and that portfolio has grown so fast. I don't want to begrudge any particular nation, but China was never a major creditor in the Kenyan books. Right now, China is the #1 single creditor with the largest single debt. These are issues that should worry every Kenyan.
But don't you think when you're borrowing and investing that money in projects that are tangible and can bring back that money, then that borrowing wouldn't have been an issue. However, the SGR was a grant project sold to Kenyans, and when the deputy president was asked about the ability to bring back profit, he said SGR si matatu. We are borrowing, investing in very grand projects, but there's kind of a discord because every time a loan is maturing, we have to borrow to pay back. Are we making a mistake in investing in the grand projects?
You see, that is why I'm talking about you needed to finance it differently. You needed more long-term financing and at a lower interest rate. But if you're trying to finance projects, especially infrastructure projects, where you will not see the financial value for a very long time, and even by the time you get to know the economic value, you are running into years of repayment. So clearly, there is a dilemma here. And the model of financing, even if it was to be associated with external borrowing, the model is wrong. The ambition around the Jubilee borrowing is wrong. And I can tell you, the president talks of the big four, all right?
Yeah.
And people have even talked about the need to fight corruption as another legacy. But I can tell you, at this rate, the elephant in the room is going to be the legacy of massive public debt.
Speaking of the big four agenda, you know, it's been allocated 450
billion.
Thereabout. And this is something that the president looks like he's very passionate about. He's spoken about it very many times in the public. But is this a tangible project that can be a legacy project that can wipe away sins such as the national debt that he will leave?
You see, the president and his advisors should perhaps relook at what Mwai Kibaki did. Mwai Kibaki said, we will have a long-term vision. And there was a broad public participation, and they created the 2030 vision. All right? Now, if you try, and he knew that it would take much longer to achieve some of those things. But here we are, making it look like the Big Four can be achieved before the end of the term of His Excellency the President. Then we are misleading the public.
You think otherwise?
I think otherwise. Let me give you an example. One of the areas that they want to boost is the area of agriculture as one of the pillars of his Big Four, agriculture and livestock development. But one of the things you missed when you are reading the tax proposals here, the government has increased export duty on leather products, that is wet blue and crushed leather, to 10%, saying that that is to get them to do value addition. Do you know this industry employs about 50,000 people? This industry raises about 150 billion Kenya shillings. Dollars, 150 billion
US dollars.
million US dollars annually. Now, you are killing all the livestock farmers. In one stroke, this guy Rotich has finished the pastoralists. Because that means their hides and skins will just drop in value. In fact, there'll be smuggling of the skins. You're killing a processing industry here. And you're telling them you want them to have value addition. You're telling them have value addition, compete with Brazil, compete with China, and compete with the Indian tanneries. And you're telling them that you are now part of setting up the manufacturing sector, the agricultural sector. Here is with one stroke, you have destroyed the pastoralists and whatever. Let me tell you how this industry works, because this is a debate we went through over a long time. When the industry is still young and they're employing about 50,000 people, the whole chain, these guys produce leather, which is then exported. Now you add 10% to it as export duty. How are you promoting exports if you are taxing your exports at that level? Where will the sheep skins go? Where will the cow skins go? Where will the camel hides go?
But allow me
Where
to
will the
interject.
goat hides go? Even fish. Now even fish, the skin of the fish is being processed. So you can see what he has done.
Killing a whole industry.
Killing a whole industry by imposing export duty. I would advise all the parliamentarians, and particularly those who value our pastoralists and our farmers of livestock, to completely negate that particular proposal in the finance bill. Now, let me give you another example. We go to housing. Okay? You say housing is one of the key areas
Yes.
for the Big Four.
500,000 housing units.
Yeah. Now, where are houses built?
Across the country?
On what surface are they built?
Land.
They're built on land. Now, you shift the capital gains tax for land transfers from 5% to 12%.
12.5.
And you're telling us you want to generate cheap housing. So who will carry the burden of that extra tax? So what is it doing to your policy around the Big Four? Now you ask yourself, will all these things really generate enough resources to finance the Big Four and to cover the deficit? I don't think so.
Last year, it was very controversial. The means that Rotich wanted to use to raise funds for the Big Four also faced a lot of resistance because of the taxes that he was proposing, 16% on fuel, excise duty on mobile transactions. This year now, he's targeting other sectors, and maybe they're hidden in certain words that Kenyans do not understand. But at the end of the day, it trickles down to them. Is the Big Four an expensive endeavor that the government is struggling to fund and is now finding alternative means, which might not be the best?
I think, you see, you can have targets and you can express your intent to do something, but be realistic on what is achievable within a certain time frame. Don't try to overload the Kenyan. And this is what I've been saying, that the more we increase in terms of debt, logically, government does not have its own money. It has to wait for money from the taxpayer. The more the taxes go up, they've gone for the traditional areas, you know, the sin tax, you know, the alcohol, cigarettes, those are the traditional areas. They've gone for the betting, which they regard as sin tax. So those ones have been raided again, all right? But I can tell you, the ones that will come in the middle from nowhere are going to be additional taxes on fuel. He may not have said much about fuel now, but you rest assured, it's going to come. For instance, when they say we want to provide a rebate and to help manufacturers by providing a formula to give them a rebate for high electricity bills, you know. But what makes electricity expensive in this country? It's products. Like fuel, where you generate power through generators and you sell it to the grid. Then the other thing is you have to factor in the crisis that is taking place in the Middle East.
Geopolitics.
I listened to him. He only talked about the trade wars between China and the United States. Yes, they will have an impact. But I listened to his speech and I didn't hear him tell us how he's cushioning this country against the possible fluctuations we are going to see in the petroleum industry, bearing in mind there's a crisis developing around Iran and Saudi Arabia. We are seeing the Yemen and all those areas. We are seeing Qatar. So that challenge is definitely going to become a very serious factor in this economy. Rotich did not mention it. Unless I was listening to something else, but from where I was sitting, I didn't capture that.
So when fuel prices go high, it's the common mwananchi that suffers.
Precisely.
You know? And during the budget reading, we couldn't kind of figure out where's the Kenyan person in all this, you know? Because some of those taxes that you're talking about are going to affect the Kenyan person at the end of the day. And you've been very vocal in lending your voice. However, you're doing it very differently. You know, we are used to seeing tear gas and live ammunition in the streets, but you are changing the way we talk about
the economy.
issues.
The economy is undergoing a serious hardship. Many businesses are closing. Many young people are unemployed and so forth. Businesses are struggling. Now, you don't want to bring another variable of creating economic chaos when people are already suffering. I think we need to also help the Kenyans to understand, and the government must understand, that the narrative must change. Listen to the people. Don't wait for them to go to the streets.
Do you think the government listens?
They may not listen fully, but some of their arms are beginning to get the cue. The governor of Central Bank did caution that the debt, external debt, and indeed the public debt in general, is now unsustainable. And he actually used the word that the government must start thinking about restructuring its public debt. I have used the words, they must think about rescheduling some of its debt.
And by rescheduling, you mean what, just for the sake of the viewer who's at home?
Rescheduling means that some of these expensive loans that they have negotiated, they will have to go back to their creditors and tell them that whereas we were able to pay you earlier, it's now dawning on us that we cannot sustain the payments. Can we renegotiate?
We have a debt of about 5.4 trillion. The budget is 3.2 trillion. This arithmetic doesn't match up.
Precisely, it doesn't. Yeah, we are moving further and further away from what you would call a balanced budget. Yeah.
And now, moving forward, this is where we are at. Mgwen, Member of Parliament, has proposed that we set a debt ceiling of at about 6 trillion Kenyan shillings so that you cannot borrow anymore, work with what you have.
The thought is good, but the methodology is what we need to figure out. And this is why, on my part, I've been saying that let us not reinvent the wheel. Let us borrow from a country like Ireland, who set up a genuinely independent debt management authority. Rotich today talked about how they have styled up their management, debt management department, and there'll be a director general. You know, for as long as that guy is sitting next to the treasury or inside the treasury building, he'll be overrun. He'll not be able to tame the appetite of the treasury. And then to what extent will he be transparent and accountable to the Kenyan people? We need an independent agency similar to what the Auditor General's office is. Let it be properly staffed, both technologically and human resource, to critically analyze any public obligation that the national government, the county government, and indeed the parastatals enter into. A good example, we're just seeing things beginning to dole out when they talk about the SGR. We are now beginning to see there are so many side agreements which have financial implications. And they have not yet been captured here. Now, with such an agency, it would have a very thorough obligation, a very thorough team to look at this and say, on this one, we recommend do not touch. And, of course, answerable to Parliament eventually.
How practical is that? Because we've seen so many bodies come on board.
It depends on how you build the institution. Let us not run away from doing what is right by saying how practical is that.
Gentlemen, I'm not trying to run away.
We have to be innovative.
I'm not trying to run away, but we know how this country works. So many task force rather have been put in place. So many bodies have been put in place.
This is not a task force. This should be an institution created through legislative fiat, through a legislation, so that it is properly legal. That is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a task force.
I like that you have hope for this nation. So, and in the process of having hope for a nation, you always think of solutions. Debt is one of the problems we have. Besides forming that body, what other solution can we adopt in relation to taming our debt?
Well, frankly speaking, we will have to just cut off certain projects completely.
Rotich mentioned that no new projects, we focus on the old ones.
But let me tell you, they're saying that, but when you go to, say, the Ministry of Infrastructure, as an example, there are about 800 projects pending. 316 of them are new. This guy, his ministry is looking for, I don't know, 1 point something trillion Kenya shillings to deal with those projects. So what is being said is not being implemented.
Moving forward, what kind of projects should the government take on?
You see, first of all, one of the issues we must look at is that unemployment is at its all-time high. So if you're going to invest in programs, can you invest in programs that you can see will definitely have a serious multiplier effect? These are issues that we can look at, and there are good brains in this country. Yeah, But when good brains are overrun by the whims of the politicians, then we lose it.
And I like that you've mentioned politics, because in this country, everything is always centered around politics. Something good could be brought up, but politics comes in and kind of tarnishes everything. But you're establishing yourself as a voice that is raising the pertinent issues that are affecting the society away from politics, kind of focusing on development politics.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is, and that is what I hope Kenyans can eventually adopt. Because if we go with the normal political profile that we have adopted for so many years in this country, then we are going to continually dig a deeper hole. We must change our attitude. So I'm very convinced that we both of us, but when I say both of us, I mean those who are in leadership and those who put people in leadership. We all have to think afresh. Let me just say, since you brought a bit of this politics, you know, there's a very simple saying, which we all know. All that glitters is not gold.
Mm-hmm.
All right? We must ask our voters, and particularly the younger generation, because they are 80% of our population is 35 years and below. And the message is simple. All that glitters is not gold. Can they start scrutinizing the people they admire a little more thoroughly? Don't take people at face value.
Mm-hmm.
Because what has happened, those politicians who have been glittering like gold are turning out to be fake gold. That is a very serious matter.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people we are putting in leadership. We have to look at what the young people say in Sheng. Mwanaume sio effort. Mwanaume ni wallet. What does that mean? This means that a culture is evolving. When Kibaki came to power, he said, we want to have a working nation.
Mm-hmm.
We want people to work hard. But here is something doing the rounds amongst our young people, which says, mwanaume sio effort, mwanaume ni wallet. So basically you're inculcating that you are nothing until you make money.
Mm-hmm.
And it does not matter how you make that money. Now let me go to the flip side of it, because I think maybe the ladies might save us. If mwanaume says, mwanaume sio effort, mwanaume ni wallet, maybe we should say, mwanaume sio wallet, mwanamke sio wallet, mwanamke ni effort. So that the ladies can bring back some sanity.
Yeah.
People must work.
Speaking of work, there has to be that work. There have to be frameworks that have been put in place to ensure that jobs can be created in a market. The government says it will create 800,000 jobs through the manufacturing sector. They want manufacturing to contribute 15% to the GDP. This is a conversation we've had since last year. The youth are still out in the streets, unemployed.
Mm-hmm. There are contradictions in some of the policies that we're talking about. Let's just take something like afforestation. Yes, we want to protect the environment. We now say we want to bring timber duty-free from outside. But electric poles used to be made from eucalyptus or tanned timber. And tanned timber was a serious agroforestry undertaking, taking in a lot of youth. So what have we done? We brought in concrete poles.
So in trying to solve one problem, you create another.
So the concrete poles are there. They're being manufactured by maybe some Chinese companies and so forth. But on the other hand, the people who would do agroforestry and have their trees grow in 3 years, 4 years, and then have them tanned, and then they do the rural electrification or they supply, what has happened? We have made sure that tanned trees are no longer profitable. KPLC has gone for concrete. Is it through a policy decision, or is it instigated?
I like that you're pointing out issues.
Yeah.
And issues that are affecting the government, things that the government is not doing right. However, you've been in government before. What's the difference?
I have had an opportunity to be on both sides of the fence. But it doesn't mean that because I was in government, I should not talk about what we need to do right. I think let's stand our ground on this as Kenyan people. We all make mistakes once in a while. But on this one, let us be very careful, because some mistakes can be very fatal and long-lasting. This is not a personal issue in the ordinary sense of the word, but it becomes very personal when you see that there are 8 million young people who remain unemployed, yet they are capable.
With a wage bill of around 1.7 trillion Kenya shillings, a lot of that money could be used to do so many things. And if you look into this wage bill, you'll find a lot of that money goes to pay maybe ghost workers. Corruption has trickled down to all facets of government. And this is something you've been very vocal about.
Yes, I agree that our current expenditure, particularly on wages, is becoming also untenable. And this is the very reason why I was making a comment and saying that Parliament, for instance, should move away from increasing the house allowance. And here's a situation where the court has made a decision in support of the SRC. And Parliament then goes to punish SRC by saying that they want to reduce their vote by over 100 million Kenya shillings. Now, Parliament is supposed to legislate for the good of the country. How can Parliament shift from being a legislative agency to a blackmail agency or institution? Because by Parliament doing that, they're telling us that they are using their constitutional authority of resource or appropriation, financial appropriation, division of resources, instead of using it for the good of the country. If they're not getting what they want to get, then they blackmail other institutions. Now, this is not the way to go.
However, you have members of parliament from your party in the National Assembly. Have you whipped them to order?
Yes, I've told them that this is not on.
What decision did they take?
They have not voted on to these issues. They're going to vote. But I've told them it's not. Where do you live? If you live in this country and you're doing this and there's so much pressure on the ground, you might go away smiling for a while, but I can tell you the voter will be waiting for you in 2022.
Well, before 2022, a lot of pilferage happens in the government. And you mentioned, let's move away from politics of threatening people to politics of handicaps. The president has been heard before saying, I will fire people, you'll be held accountable. But it's a velvet glove. How do we transition to an iron fist?
First of all, let me just say this. Corruption must be fought, okay? And no matter how much you talk about it, eventually the buck stops with the CEO of the nation. And this is why I've been telling the president from time to time that people want to hear less and see more action. And seeing more action can be in many ways. The president has the right, the power to fire. Okay, he has not exercised that power. And if the president, for instance, looked at you and says, Ondiro, you are my cabinet secretary for infrastructure. The intelligence reports that I have are such that all is not well where you sit, and I have lost confidence in you. What would you do? If the president and commander-in-chief of the defense forces is telling you I've lost confidence in you, what would you do?
Well, they have decent ways. They take sick leaves and provide for public office.
No, wouldn't you resign?
In Kenya?
No, but That is what, those are the standards that we should bring on the table.
Gentlemen, let's be a little bit civilized with each other.
But that is what I'm trying to say.
But you've been equally in that kind of position.
No.
You were being investigated.
For? When I was investigated, that was much earlier.
But you did not step aside and you did not resign.
Let me tell you, that is way beyond what we are talking about. When I was in government, we were more serious, more used to sack us. If you thought that you're not doing what you're supposed to do, you would lose your job. Right now, this is not happening. Now, you cannot sit and say, let us have a Pontius Pilate scenario. That, this fellow is like this, we don't touch him, let's push him to Herod. Let's not do that for this country. Then second, we need to continuously resource our agencies properly. This is the EACC.
Yeah.
We need to resource the ethics and anti-corruption properly, both in terms of human resource and technology. The same must go for the judiciary. Now, when you look at the budgetary allocations,
the EACC got 2.9 billion.
Right. So tell me then, where's the commitment? Tell me.
Good question for the government.
And how much did the DPP get for his prosecutions? These are the fundamental questions that I say that people want to see more action.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So allocate more funds to the bodies and organs that are tasked towards fighting corruption.
Yes.
People will be arrested, people sleep in jail, people go to court, but we are yet to see proper channels of asset reclamation and investing that money back into the society.
You see, asset tracing is very important. That is another institution that needs to be strengthened, because corrupt people hide their assets, and it takes a lot of work to trace these assets. So all these institutions that focus around fighting corruption need to be properly resourced, both in terms of technology, in terms of human resource, and we need to sign up to more mutual assistance agreements with other nations, because some of these resources are not necessarily stored here. They may be stored in safe havens in different areas. So the government of the day must work also with the international community genuinely, so that the resources out there can also be brought back to Kenya.
Where CS Rotich is sitting, you've sat before, but under a different title, Minister of Finance. What alternative budgetary plans would you have come up with?
Well, I've talked about some of them, but all I can say is that I would be very, very hard at this point in time in making sure that expenditure is curtailed.
How do you do that?
And I would, well, that would mean looking at this a little more. But I can tell you, cut out some of these expenditures. If projects have not, even if they've just been signed, and if projects, there's a sniffing of corruption, that this project was executed or entered into without proper feasibility studies, without proper procurement. A contract entered into fraudulently cannot be enforced. So if there are projects that have been entered into fraudulently, the government should just be firm and say, we are not going to pay for contracts that were not entered into in terms of the procedure that is required.
So the government needs to be very stern in what
Yes.
projects it invests its money in.
Yes.
If it's in a fraudulent manner, it's not putting its money
How
in.
do you enforce? Why should you pay somebody who has gotten something through false pretenses? If that has happened, you really have no obligation. Yeah.
You've been lending out your voice. Do you think it's beginning to have impact and gain the traction that you need to champion for some of these worthy causes that you're bringing up?
I think so. I think it's not an overnight thing. It's a long haul, okay? And I think the voice that I'm raising, the issues that I'm raising, are issues that are so dear to the people of Kenya.
Okay.
And we must also realize that the society has changed. There's broader communication. People are more educated. And therefore the issues I'm raising are resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah.
They want good leadership and they want good public policy. Let's
cross over to Twitter just for a minute, because people have been talking, and one person says here, this is Agola M. He says, why the sudden change of heart from Honorable Mudavadi to start speaking about pertinent issues that he wasn't speaking about before? And would it be another case like Rao, in that should he get a government job, he will go mute?
Well, I cannot speak for Rao. I have a lot of respect for Rao, so I'll not want to talk about his style and what his position is. But I just want to say this. I have been speaking these issues for a long time, but people have not been listening. People have been following the fantasy of glitter and whatever you call it, the excitement. They have not been assessing and analyzing what other politicians are saying. All right? People have been in a hurry to simply put Kenyans in two lanes. It is Mr. X's lane or Mr. Y's lane. You're either with this guy or you're... They have not been taking time to analyze and listen. Now I'm happy that such queries are coming through from Mr. Ogola, because this is what I've been yearning for. People must learn to listen to each other and hear the other voices.
Finally, someone is saying here, besides pointing out the problems, what is the solution that Mudavadi is bringing on the table?
Well, the solution is I'm pleading for your vote.
Oh,
because
you went for it. You went for it.
Because you empower me, you give me the mandate, then take me to account.
Isn't this the very conversation Kenyans had with Uhuru Kenyatta in 2013?
They had it, but that is Uhuru Kenyatta. I am Musalia Mudavadi. We are two different people.
So you are putting a case for yourself for 2022?
I'm putting a case for myself and for so many other Kenyans who want to see things done right. And I can tell you there are many.
What should make the Kenyan sure that things will be done right once you're sent to power? It's the Kenyan culture. Once someone is sent to power,
that is a defeatist attitude.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're seeing what's happening with the budget. We're seeing corruption at county level.
But it's yes, even at county level it has escalated. And this is why I'm even cautioning on the issue of the referendum.
Yeah.
All right? Because I've been telling people that Kenyans want to know what is in it for them if we were to go to a referendum. We have not yet defined the question. But people are already jumping to paint others blue or red.
Yeah.
You're either the red or the blue. But you have no question in front of you. All right? And I'm telling them, for instance, that if the referendum question is about the political elite sharing positions, then you've lost the ground and you've lost the people.
Okay.
People want to see a more accountable process. Have we fully audited the implementation process of the current constitution to know exactly where we want to touch? And are we participating fully? Or are we making it a debate of the elite? Now, these are the critical issues that we must talk about so that we make the right decisions for the Kenyan people. You know, on a lighter note, but it's serious, the referendum in UK, the Brexit referendum, has already taken down 2 prime ministers.
Yeah, Cameron and Theresa May.
And don't be surprised, even the one who takes over, going down from the, reeling from the effect of that particular referendum. Referendums have got their own dynamics. And indeed, even in Kenya, the referendum of 2010 did eliminate the position of Prime Minister. Didn't it?
It did.
Right. And now there's debate that can we
bring it back
for
inclusion,
for
more recurrent expenditure. Hold on to that.
And then some governors who everybody knows, they're out there, you know. I can't name names here, but they're out there, and everybody knows that in their county there's a magical figure of about 2 billion. Nearly every county governor who is facing some issues, the figure is roughly 2 billion. So you wonder, how did they arrive at this figure of 2 billion as not being accounted for properly? And then some proposals are there that now let's create another layer of super governors. Should those guys not be having their day in court? Or should we be preparing to reward them with another layer, and at whose cost?
Well, hold on to that thought. We want to take a short breather. When we come back, I'll be on that screen and we'll be sampling some of your views, and we will wind up the show. And Honorable Musalia Mudavadi can tell us what exactly is his plan for 2022, and is it just politics or it's time for change? Stay with Metropole TV.